Welcome to Living Vividly, the podcast where health, wellness, and curiosity collide. I'm Jackie, the founder of Vivid Health and Wellness, your guide on this journey to living your happiest and healthiest life. I'll be joined by some amazing co-hosts who bring their expertise and energy to every conversation. First up, we've got Daphne, our unconventional yet totally brilliant registered dietitian who's never afraid to shake up your approach to food. Then there's Dr. Mary Beth Moss, a physical therapist with a special passion for helping dancers move better and live better, no matter what stage of life they're in. And of course, we can't forget our trusty producer, Dustin, who helps keep everything running smoothly behind the scenes. We'll be having informative and engaging conversations with health and wellness pros, plus everyday people who've got incredible stories of their own health journeys. Whether you're looking to fuel your body better, move with ease, or just learn how to thrive in this crazy world, we're here to help you do it, all while living vividly. So let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of Living Vividly. We're joined today by my friend Erin Dufour, and we're going to talk about something that a lot of people avoid, but it's inevitable and important.
So tell us a little bit about your background, Erin.
So we'll go all the way back to 1999.
Okay.
On my birthday of that year in November, I became a firefighter and journeyed through the next year of all of the responsibilities of that at the airport in Alexandria of becoming a paramedic as well. So I experienced a considerable amount of trauma during that time, picking up people and dealing with their griefs.
Right. So you're seeing people at their kind of at their lowest point, or one of their lowest points at that, whenever you're in that business of firefighter, paramedic, people are not shining at that time.
No, people are not shining at that time. But it was actually a wonderful experience to kind of get out of my own self, get out of my way, and really be able to concentrate on people and to figure out how to help them in their worst places in life. And I did that for 7 years. And then I decided on a whim that I wanted to become a nurse because actually I wanted to be a flight medic. Didn't want to be on the ground anymore. I wanted to be a flight medic. And at the time, the company that I was with said, well, if you want to be a flight medic, you're going to have to be a nurse because everybody is having to go to nursing school to be a flight nurse. And I was like, okay, sign me up.
Okay.
So that's how I became a nurse. And from there, I'm a trauma junkie. So from there, it was, I needed to go into the ER. And children, pediatrics was actually my weakest link or my weakest point.
That's got to be really hard.
Yeah.
In nursing school. So I challenged myself to go into the pediatric ER.
Wow.
And that's where I felt like, and my husband and I, we talked about a lot of things is, you learn a lot in school through the books, but it's really OJT, on the job training.
Absolutely.
Where you put everything together. So I said, okay, so I'm going to be in the children's ER. So I became a tech at the time in the children's ER to kind of ease my way in while I was going to nursing school. And that was in San Antonio. And I dealt with a lot of unexpected trauma. Not a lot of death in there because we do everything we can to save children, everything. So, but I dealt with a lot of family grief as they're
fear.
going.
I mean, that's a parent's absolute worst fear.
Yeah. Going through that trauma. So you have to deal with, I think that was great for me to learn not only how to deal with the patient that can't talk to you.
Right.
But also dealing with the family perspective.
Yeah. Because in pediatrics, it's never just the patient.
Correct.
I mean, it's always multiple family members.
Yeah.
Usually.
So, and then in that very emergent situation.
And I'm sure accidents are involved and just, I can't even imagine some of like the trauma those parents are experiencing, whether, things happen really quickly. And I'm sure you saw a lot of that.
Yes, very quickly. And I did night nursing. So I started out in the middle of the night in the ER. That is when the ERs always happen in the evening. When you do the 7P to 7A shift, there's no doctor offices open.
Right.
Nothing really going on anymore because everything's closed. So the only place to go, even a clinic, you can't even go to. So everything you have to go to the ER. So it's extremely busy all the time. And work through the bird flu, all of that stuff. That was extremely crazy working through all of that. We saw literally thousands of patients every day because where we were in San Antonio, we took care of from down in Brownsville, all over Texas. They would fly in to us to that medical center area.
Was it like a trauma center?
It was a trauma center.
Okay.
But our facility was pediatrics only. So we were the children's we were truly a children's hospital. We were right next to the adult hospital as well, but we were truly a children's hospital. And there's several of them in San Antonio, and we weren't the only ones, but very always hopping around there, San Antonio. People flying in from Dallas and all over Texas and even outside of Texas that were flying in. So that was an amazing experience. Then we moved back here. I'm from Texas. My husband's from here. So we moved back here, and the facility I worked with, Methodist, was an HCA facility. So I interviewed at Women's and Children's here in Lafayette, and they didn't have a position at the time, even though I interviewed in the ER, but they had a position in the pediatric ICU. So that's how I ended up in the pediatric ICU. It was like, okay, I'll give that a try, which was a whole another level of care because now I'm not just the one that's stabilizing you.
Right.
Now I have to like treat you and care for you the entire time that you're in that hospital.
And the adrenaline has run off for the parents, and that's tough.
So that was a beautiful experience too. I feel like I'm a pediatric nurse at heart, even though the last 8 years that I was nursing, I was at the adult ICU. That's crazy because the first 6 months I was in the adult ICU, I saw more death in the adult ICU in that short period of time than I did from 1999 to 2012. From from the ambulance to pediatrics, I saw more death in the first 6 months in the adult ICU. And I was there for 8 years. So the last 3 years I was there, I was dealing with my own grief because in 2016, I lost my mom to stage 4 breast cancer. She was diagnosed in June and passed away in July.
Wow.
Not even a whole month after her diagnosis. I lost my dad 3 weeks to the day after my mom. He died of a massive heart attack. And then my grandfather, his father, he was my only surviving grandparent. He was going to get me through all of the firsts. He passed away just before Thanksgiving, just before my birthday.
My goodness.
Wow.
So 3 months after my dad. That was really hard to go back to work. Every time. It was hard to go back to work after my mom died. And then after my dad. And then after my grandfather was just excruciating. And to walk that walk with all of my patients and their families, because there was still a lot of death. I mean, people associate a lot of death in the ICU with COVID, but there's a whole lot of death in the ICU before that.
Right.
And it could be, it could be a trauma. And we've had kids from UL that were in a car wreck that didn't make it. And it could be, 90-year-olds that have had a really good life and pneumonia. They had COPD, something that brought them in. And we just had way too many bad conversations at the bedside of, okay, what does your mom, what does your dad, what does your sister, how much care do they want? How much life support do they want? And a lot of people just didn't recognize that. Well, we never talked about that before. I don't know what they want.
It's a lot of pressure on that person to make a decision for their family member.
In a high stress situation.
Yes.
There's a lot of emotion involved at that point.
And really probably doing, not selfishly in a mean way, but you make the decision that you want for that person in a lot of
Exactly. Because a lot of times you're not ready to let go. You're not ready to say goodbye. You're like, no, this can't happen. And there's those conversations that families are not having, that we're not talking about.
So why do you think that the discussion about death prior to being in that traumatic situation, why do you think that that is so difficult? And I would say that's probably more here in the United States, more of a difficult conversation than in other parts of the world.
That's such a great question.
Why do you, I mean, because we don't talk about it. I can say that with my mom, we've kind of jokingly decided we haven't had a conversation, like a heartfelt conversation, but if she were to die today, I know exactly what we would do. We've got everything ready to go. She wants a party. I know what song she would want to play. Like, I know all of that, but anybody else in my family, I don't. And we haven't had that conversation. My in-laws are in their mid-80s. So it's inevitable that it is going to happen. But it's not ever really discussed. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on why you think we don't discuss death whenever we all know it's going to happen.
It's just not a topic we grew up with. Like, we're always thinking about, how can we be better? A self-help book. What can I do? I need to go to CrossFit. I need to go on a diet. we need to think about all these things, but we don't ever talk about like legacy. So like legacy, a lot of people think of as money. But our legacy is like, what are we going to leave behind? How are people going to think about us? How are we impacting our family members, our friends, our community, the people we work with? It's just not on our radar. And then when it does become on our radar, like, oh my gosh. So like just being in the ER, being at the fire department and all that, it's like that became very evident to me, like, oh my gosh, we're not guaranteed tomorrow. Okay, we all know we're going to die, but like we just put it in the back of our minds.
We all think that we're going to die when we get elderly.
Okay. And I think
if we're not in that elderly position, then it's not going to happen right now.
I also have seen, like, in my lifetime, I feel like the views on aging have changed a lot. Like, there's really an avoidance of aging right now. Like, there's not as much of that respect and reverence for the wisdom that you gain. Like, as you get older, it's more of like, let's try to stay and look as young as we can, for as long as we can. And I wonder if there's any correlation between people's views on aging and some type of acceptance with talking about death.
And it could be because, like, we always talk about, like, 30 is the new 20.
Right.
40 is the new 30, whatever. 80 is the new 50. I don't know. I think about pecking order. We do think that that death comes with age. Wisdom comes with age. Death comes with age. So there's like a pecking order. And I felt guilty to that because I remember when my grandfather turned 90. When my grandfather died, he was 94, not quite 94 years old.
Wow.
Died in November. January, he would have been 94. I remember going to his 90th birthday in San Antonio. My mom lived in Houston. And my mom and dad were divorced, short on schedules and all that. Mom, I have a 3-day weekend, then I got to be back to work on Monday or whatnot. And she's like, well, are you going to stop and visit? Oh, yeah. But I remember thinking and even having that conversation, like, my mom's 67 years old. My grandfather's 90. Mom, we're not guaranteed. Like, he might not be here next year.
Right.
And my mom was the first to go. She was 69. She didn't make it to her 70th birthday.
Yeah.
My dad was the next to go, and he was 73. And then my grandfather.
Right.
So there is, and I knew this working in a children's ER, children in the PICU. I knew this. There's no pecking order. We lose life in the womb.
Right.
We lose life at birth. We lose life at, we have SIDS. We lose life at 3 months old. I mean, people experience that death in all capacities, but in our mind, we think it comes with age.
Right.
And it doesn't.
And so I think also if someone is elderly, like has gotten to that point where you feel like, okay, the reality is that I know that they're not going to live forever. There's to have the conversation at that point is a little bit, maybe like off-putting, where they would start realizing like, oh, so you think I'm going to die now? Like, to have that conversation is still not comfortable, even when they're in the position that, yes, it's time, it's going to happen. And for us to be prepared for it, still is an awkward conversation.
I feel like it kind of goes both ways though, because we might think that they feel that way. So we avoid that conversation because we don't want to make them uncomfortable, and they might not know how to bring it up to their younger family. It's something that's on their mind all the time, and I'm going to die in the next 10 years probably, and wanting to have those conversations but not knowing how to burden your family with that conversation. Like, we're all just uncomfortable and we don't know how to bring it up to each other.
And I think it's just starting that, like, hey, you ever think about death? Matthew Kelly has written a book called The Fourth Quarter, and it's about all the things that are important in your life. And he talks about, so one of the faults that we have is we think about when we turn 50, that's like halftime. Okay.
Right.
Like, we all have this idea that we're going to live to be 100 years old. When statistics show, life insurance, you look at life insurance and...
Well, even the life expectancy is not going up.
74 for men, 74 point really whatever, 74 for men and 80 for women. Okay.
So 50 is like third quarter. Like, you're moving into the fourth quarter.
50 is third quarter. Exactly. So Matthew Kelly, right, 0 to 20, you're in your first quarter, 21 to 40, you're in your second quarter, 41 to 60, you're in your third quarter. So I'm in my third quarter. 61 to 80, you're in your fourth quarter of life. If you make it over 80, okay, you're in overtime. That's great. Right. That's fabulous. But statistics are showing that men don't even make it to 80.
Here.
Yeah. Yeah, in the United States. So in our insurances are based off of that. Our health insurances, so many things are based off of our age and all that. So for us to think, oh yeah, I'm at halftime at 50. Like, no, you're halfway through the third quarter.
Yeah, I remember
already.
the first time somebody told me that their doctor, I want to say they were like 38, like late 30s, more than 35, but not quite 40. Their doctor told them that they were in midlife. And she was like, I'm not in midlife. And he was like, oh yeah, you actually are. And I was older than that at that point. And I was like, holy moly.
Yeah, it's a wake-up call.
Yeah. I think our perception is that death only happens whenever we get old, but realistically, we all know someone who has passed away earlier in life, not in their fourth quarter. So I think the conversation of death is well overdue. And just as we talk about, improving our life and making our life better, just as they talked about in the book, Death Over Dinner, that one of the ways to improve your life is to be very clear about what you would want your death process to look like.
And not just be very clear about what you want, but also be very mindful of who's going to follow out those wishes. Right. It doesn't have to be a family member. We all think it has to be our spouse or whatnot. But just recently, my father-in-law, all he ever wanted to do was go back home. And my father-in-law did not die at home. The family was very divided over that.
Yeah.
And
I read in the book, he said that 75% of Americans want to die at home, yet only 25% of them actually do get to die at home.
Correct. One, because people don't know what you want.
Right.
Sometimes they get to the ICU and you don't think like, this is it.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it happens fast.
So it happens so quickly.
Or you probably have some hope that like the next thing we try is going to work. The next thing that we try is going to work.
Yes.
Or also I would imagine some guilt too, that maybe we should call it the end now, but I don't want to be the one to make that decision. I don't want everybody to look at me and be like, oh, well, she's the one that made the decision too early. Or, that I can imagine could be a family dynamic, that the complexities of the relationships in a family, where everybody wants to just kind of keep pushing it if you don't really know what that person would want.
Right. The other thing too is we talk about advanced directives. I think he might mention that a little bit in the book as well. Mm-hmm. On the website, there's a place that you can go to for that. But I know here in Louisiana too is people can walk through your advanced directives unless you have a La Poste, where you make the decision of what your final ending is going to be. If you're going to be on life support, if you're going to have tube feedings, whatnot. And your physician actually signs off on that. I know mom said that, and in her advance directive, she had that. But yeah, no, I'm not ready for mom to go yet.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I want her to be on life support. I want her to have that trach. I want her to have that peg tube. I want her to see I want to see if she's going to wake up. Be very mindful of, don't assume that just because your children know, or your spouse knows, or your parents know what you want, that they're actually going to follow through with that. Especially, some people will disagree with you. If you say, well, I want to be cremated. Well, I don't want you to be cremated.
Right.
Yeah. Emotions are high when people are dying, and before death and after death, and we just make bad decisions because it hurts so bad to let somebody go.
Right.
For it to be different than what we want.
And here's an easy way too that I have felt like being a nurse. I have some of my dear friends are LOPA nurses, Louisiana Organ Procurement Association. And so here's an easy way to have that conversation. Everybody goes to the driver's license bureau, and you get to decide on the back of your driver's license if you're going to donate your organs or not. Kids are doing that at school when they go.
Right.
So that's one way to kind of talk to teens about it as well, as they're becoming responsible to be drivers and whatnot. It's like, hey, so on the back of your driver's license, it says this. What do you think about that? And then to just ease into it. And he talks about this in his book, Let's Talk About Death Over Dinner. When we talk about things in a safe environment, and at the dinner table can be one of the safest environments that we have. There's no rush to get to an answer.
Yeah.
And there's no right or wrong answer. And it's just like, how are you feeling about it today? And just having, he has some great questions to ask. If you only had 1 month to live, what would you do? Or if you knew where you were going to die or when you were going to die, who would you want to be with? Who would you want to be surrounded with?
So with your experience at bedside, was there like a common piece of advice or regret that you were seeing with your patients or their family?
The common regret would be, I didn't have enough time with my family, or I'm fighting with my brother and I just want us to be at peace. It definitely wasn't, I needed to work more,
Yeah, right. So like forgiveness and presence.
I should have made $100,000 more that year, whatever. It wasn't that. It was really more about their relationships, who was still in their life, or the things that they didn't get to say, and they wanted to say. After my mom died, and it was after my dad died too. I think it was before my grandfather died. That was just such a blur that year. But I took care of a lady who was hanging on to life because she wanted to see her very first grandchild born. She didn't make it. She didn't make it. But her children, it was just so beautiful because they would come in and she was on the vent. It just progressively, her lung disease got worse and worse and worse. So she didn't come into the ICU on the vent, but she ended up on the vent. And she didn't want to be sedated because she wanted, like, if my grandchild's born, I want to be able to hold it, all of that. And it was beautiful to just walk that walk with her children and with her siblings, to be able to come in and lay in the bed with her and still be able to communicate with her.
It's a more human experience.
A very human experience. I'm sorry that she didn't get to have that at home. But it was a beautiful experience that she got to have, that we got to help out with. And even though she didn't make it to her grandchild's birth, her grandchild has learned all about his grandmother, and they celebrate her every year. I keep up with her children. That's
one thing that hurts. I still, to this day, tear up about it, thinking about some of those people who died during COVID. I understand the measures that had to be taken, but it was such a not human death experience for a lot of those people. They had no connection. It's just those hospital settings can be really hard. Yeah.
They died alone. And
or with people that they didn't know. And You don't get to have those
thankful I wasn't there. I'm
conversations
thankful
and-
I wasn't there during COVID. I left right at the beginning of that. It was time for me through my own grief. Like I said, I stayed 3 years after I lost everybody. I had walked so many walks with people. And I knew when I would go into work every day, like, okay, I'm going to cry today. Somewhere along the way, I'm going to cry. And I gave myself grace to do that. And I just prayed like, okay, Lord, please don't let it be in somebody's room.
Yeah.
Let me be strong enough to hold it together in their room, and then I can run out and go to the bathroom or do whatever I need to do. And I'm so grateful I wasn't there during all the COVID, because I would have had a lot of problem with that. And I
would imagine a lot of those hospital workers do.
A lot of my friends that did that. I mean, there's a lot of PTSD out there from caregivers that didn't agree with that, that did have that their patients
I
died alone.
Cannot imagine witnessing that.
Right.
Yeah.
And having to be the one to tell the families they couldn't be there. That had to be one of the hardest times in our lifetime history.
Trauma from that.
Yeah.
When did you come across this book?
How did you get involved with these
How did I get
dinners?
involved? So she's talking about Let's Talk About Death Over Dinner from Michael Hebb. And I actually came across this book when I left the ICU. I started teaching at UL in the nursing program. And I inherited one of the electives, palliative care, end of life. I was honored to, because I felt like our nurses needed a lot more experience in that conversation, in that field. We don't have any education on that. As a matter of fact, it was cut from the program after COVID.
I'm sure it was also hard because you were leaving the hospital system because of your grief with that. And then it's like you're going to face it
Like,
in
this is
education
inevitable.
now.
This is your thing.
No coincidences.
Well, I had a semester or two before I actually inherited that. And I was good. I was teaching pediatrics, the clinical side of it. So I was back into my realm of what I love. This book was one of the books that was recommended to me in the course at several of the people that I met, because it was during COVID. So we were doing everything Zoom when I inherited this.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have some speakers come in every week. So I would have someone from Hospice of Acadiana talk a little bit. And I was reading all these books. I was reading Life is Messy from Matthew Kelly. I was reading this. There's another one called The Art of Dying Well. All these books, anything I was just could get my hands on. And I came across this book, and it just so spoke to me, because I was like, yes, finally somebody that understands, that wasn't even in the medical field, that totally understood. We do not need to be having these conversations in the critical moment at the bedside of what life and death.
When some people can't have the conversation, it's the family.
Correct. So I read this book and I was like, I love this book. We need to do this in Lafayette. We need to open up the conversation.
So tell us a little bit about what the conversation. I mean, obviously it's about death, but what is the action that you're doing? Like, what do you want to do?
My purpose, and I think even in this book of Let's Talk About Death Over Dinner, ultimately, when we recognize that we're all going to die and we embrace that, in order to die well, we also have to live well. So when we embrace that, I'm not guaranteed tomorrow. So how am I going to show up as my best self today? And what's really important today?
What stressors do I not really need to worry about?
Right. I mean, Steve Jobs used to say, and I've read, and I think Matthew Kelly has it in one of his books, and I've heard this multiple times. He used to ask himself every day, if I died tomorrow or today, am I doing exactly what I want to be doing? And if the answer was no, too many days in a row, then he's like, I need to change something. My mom used to say growing up, Erin, life is not fair. And life can make you bitter or it can make you better. It's your choice.
Right.
And I know a lot of people that are very bitter. They say yes to everything, and then they complain about saying yes to everything. Right. And they just walk through life, and they perpetuate that attitude to their children. So now their children are doing 40 million things at one time, and they don't know how to say no. And and everybody's in a hurry. And I think this allowed me to say, okay, we need to slow down. I'm like, what really is important? And is the soccer game, because sports are no longer like it were when I was growing up.
Right.
You know, like when y'all were growing up, like we had seasons. We played football, we played soccer, and now everything is like all year long. You know, now it's like being able to slow down, giving yourself permission to slow down and say, I'm just going to be here with my family today.
And I think the hard thing about getting to that perspective is that you have to go through some type of
Loss,
suffering or loss or grief to be able to see that perspective. And it's hard. It's hard to get through it.
Agreed.
So how many dinners have you done?
I've had 3 dinners.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about them. How are they set up? Like, paint the picture for us. So if we were going to dinner, what would we expect?
The first dinner I had was around Halloween. I want to say we had 7 couples. There's 14
wow, that's a
of
big
us,
group.
including us, like 14. We had it outside. It was really cold. And so we had a big fireplace. We have an outside fireplace. So we had a big fire going. And I just kind of put my tables together like a U-shaped table so that everybody could see each other across. So we start the dinner with a candle. So everybody at the table has a candle and a glass, whether you want a glass of wine, a drink, tea, water, you know, whatever your preference is to drink. And so somebody starts and I gave everybody, I think in the book, he's like, you know, depending on how big your audience, your dinner is, how many people are there, you know, maybe a couple minutes, 2 minutes. We might have taken 5 minutes. Some people took longer, some people took shorter. And we talk about somebody that has gone before us in our life, that has passed, that has impacted our life in a positive way. And talk about that person. What do they do for you? Anything you want to say about them to honor them. And then you tell everybody what their name is. And so then we all raise our glass. You light a candle. They light the candle for that person, honor, and then you raise that glass for that person. And we all toast that person in their life. So by the time you get around to the end of the table, to the last person, you have a candlelit dinner going on. And I'm all about the ambience. I love candlelight, warmth and all that. And so then dinner's served. Everybody gets up and serve their dinner. And you can do this at restaurants or whatnot. And then from there, you have your questions. So these are questions you can share with everybody beforehand, or you can kind of keep it to yourself. And some of the questions just kind of like from the book. So like if you want to know, like, how do I approach this conversation? If you only had 30 days left to live, how would you spend them? If it's your last day or your last hour, how would you spend them? Is there an excess of medical intervention at the end of life? Some people want everything done, and some people are like me, been there in the ICU, don't want to have nothing to do with that.
It also probably depends on stage of life, because like I have a young daughter right now, so my perspective right now is different than what I see my perspective in like 20 years.
How do you talk to kids about death? How would you do that? Because kids do ask, grandma dies, you know, how do you have that? How do you have that conversation?
It's a tough conversation with kids.
Yeah.
I just had actually that conversation with my daughter for the first time this week. It was awesome. It was shockingly awesome. So not everybody knows this about me, but my daughter's biological father passed away whenever I was pregnant with her. And last week was the week that I told her, and it was beautiful. I'm not making this about that, but it was beautiful, and she handled it better than I did. And she's curious, you know, she wants to know more, but it wasn't scary for her. And I think it's really because I read some of the book before, and I prepared a lot and talked to a lot of therapists, and, you know, painted a picture for her that wasn't doom and gloom. You know, it's part of life. We all are going to pass away. Just like with our elderly family members, we create this fear in our minds about how that conversation is going to go when it's...
we don't like discomfort.
Right. It's a shared human experience. We're all going to die. And I think pretending like that's not part of life and avoiding that conversation with kids is doing them a disservice, because someone's going to suddenly die one day in their life and you're going to have to deal with it.
The conversation gets, I would imagine, at dinner gets a little uncomfortable for some people. I just like whenever you're getting a group of people together to talk about anything, some people will be very freely open and some people will be a little bit uncomfortable. So is the purpose of the dinner to just open up and make the conversation an easier conversation to have?
It is.
Okay.
And is it to bring people more at peace with death, or to like legally plan? Not legally, but like
it's just to start the conversation, to have a place to start it with, and
so an icebreaker.
You want to have someone with them that's significant in their life. So you don't want someone to come by themselves. You want them to bring a daughter, bring a son, age appropriate, right? Bring a spouse, bring a best friend, bring your mother, bring your father. Bring somebody that's close to you that you can then. It's supposed to spark conversation when you leave there. Okay, let's really have this conversation. What does it look like? My second one that I had was actually for a women's retreat. So the whole retreat was addressing burnout in healthcare providers, because I was there. Mm-hmm. And I had left, and I'm like, I know what I needed on hindsight for burnout. And I was like, you know what? I want to create a retreat that helps people recognize I'm in that burnout stage. Mm-hmm. Or if I am in that burnout stage, what's next? Or if I have been in that burnout stage, there's life after burnout. I really wanted to focus in on caregivers. As a friend pointed out to me, I did have a few mothers. She's like, well, Erin, mothers are caregivers. And I'm like, I recognize that. I'm like, but do you understand how many people at the bedside, doctors, nurses, therapists, that are burnt out? We're not being effective because we're not even caring for ourselves.
Right.
And so as I was creating this retreat, a women's retreat for that weekend of, let's talk about several areas of life. What are our goals? How do we slow down? How do we be purposeful with life? How do we say no? No is very empowering. How do we do that? And I was doing it more for the women that I work with, because honestly, the male nurses and therapists that I work with, not all of them, but most men, they can, you know what, babe, I'm going hunting for the weekend. Mm-hmm. I'll see you. They don't worry about who's going to feed the kids. They don't worry about who's going to clean the house. They don't worry about any other thing.
It's definitely different strengths.
So they can step back and they get their time of peace and regrouping so that they can come back home and be a good dad, be a good whatever, right? And it's the women that are left, we don't give ourselves permission to step back.
Yeah, there's no decompression time.
I also think feminine is naturally more empathetic.
Sure. Absolutely.
And so maybe there's a difference in how people take on those bedside experiences too.
Right. When I was creating that weekend for that retreat, I already had this in my pocket. I'm like, you know what? We're going to start out Friday night. We're going to have, let's talk about death over dinner, because I want everyone to recognize, y'all, even us, every single one of, and my dad used to say this, it used to aggravate me so bad, but my dad used to say, Erin, ain't none of us get out of here alive. Right. Okay. Loosen up. And none of us get out of here alive. Because I'd be like, Dad, you need to do this, this, and this. You need to change that. You need to quit drinking. You need to quit smoking. Da, da, da. What was crazy, this is kind of going back to my mom though. And this was before I had done any hospice. I did a little bit of hospice, but before I'd done any of that, I remember when my mom went into hospice on a Tuesday and she died on Saturday. So she didn't last very long. Thank you, Lord. When we went in, the nurses were like, because she was inpatient hospice. So we just kind of transferred from one area of the hospital to the other in Houston. And they were like, so does your mom smoke? No, doesn't smoke. Does your mom drink? Mom was like, nope. She's never had a drink in her life. Okay, does your mom do drugs? No. Doesn't smoke, doesn't drink, doesn't do drugs. I'm like, so why do you ask all these questions going into hospice? And they're like, because we're not going to withhold anything from your mother. Whatever makes your mom happy, whatever her vices are, that we think, if she wants to eat sweets 24/7, like whatever, it doesn't matter. This is not about what she cannot do and what will make her healthier. This is about what is going to give her pleasure,
support her
in her end of life.
Peace.
And I was like, wow, that's a whole nother perspective. Because how many people in the ICU have tried to educate on, okay, now that you've had that heart attack,
right,
your diet needs to be different. Your stress level needs to be different. Just all these things that we need to change through life. And they weren't doing that. So I would have that conversation with my dad all the time. And he would say, Erin, ain't none of get out of here alive. So I ended up having, we had, how many ladies I had at my retreat? I think we had 16 ladies at the retreat, and including myself. And it was a beautiful, same thing. I actually had one of the hospice pastors come in that night. She was like, oh, I want to come just for the dinner part, Erin. And so she came in and she actually did our prayer before dinner and all that. And there were a lot of women that were apprehensive. At first, they were like, what have I gotten myself into?
Yeah.
Like, I can't believe I'm starting this retreat about life with talking about death. But that was exactly what I wanted to do, is I wanted to spur that. Let's all recognize that we're not guaranteed tomorrow. And if we do that, when we wake up tomorrow, how can we live differently? How can we live better?
Live vividly. How can we live vividly?
Exactly. And when we're doing that, it's not just about us and how we're living better, but how are we showing up and serving others better? So living vividly, you're serving others so well in the community with this. And I just had to say, thank y'all so much for doing this.
It's been awesome.
Yeah, it's been good. It's been good. What are some of the experiences that you have? Like, give us a story or something that's happened in a dinner where you feel like people have walked away thinking, man, I was really apprehensive coming into this. This was really awkward, but I can see the bigger picture now. And I can see that talking about death is important. Talking about death can allow us to open up and live more vividly and have more of a life experience, because we know that we're all going to die.
One lady walked away. She had a friend that was dying of cancer. Mm-hmm. And she was always afraid to approach her friend with that oh my gosh, she's dying of cancer. I don't want to talk about death. And she actually walked away from that evening at dinner. This was at our house. She actually walked away from that evening with, you know what, I can approach this subject with her. And she talks about now that, and her friend has since passed. And she talks about now, she's like, Erin, I'm just so thankful that I actually, as scary as it was, said, let's talk about what your end of life looks like. And her friend was like,
I'm sure,
thank goodness,
there's some peace to that, because nobody wants to bring that up.
Yeah.
But it's something to process, and it's hard to process on your own if you don't have a provider or counselor or something for that. So I'm sure her friend was so appreciative.
She was relieved because, like, her husband, they were so focused on treatment and all this. Her husband was so focused on keeping her alive in this, that she was like, I just know. And she was at peace with, I know I'm going to die. I know I'm not going to live through this. Yeah. If I do, by the grace of God, great. But, and they had like a 4-year-old child. So she was like, and her friend was, their daughters were friends and all that. So she's like, this is what I need you. I need you to keep I need you to keep my memory alive with my daughter. And so she helped her friend actually write her own epitaph. What to say at the funeral. So it was beautiful for her to come back and say, Erin, I so needed to come to that dinner. And so that I could have the courage to have that conversation.
How many people pass away without having that opportunity? It's such a lost opportunity for the person that passed away, and also the family, because it can be so healing.
Very
to
healing.
Have that closure with them.
For both, like you said. So it's this idea that we have in our head, like you said, like, oh, what are they going to think if I ask them at 80? Oh, now you think I'm going to die.
Right.
And they may joke like that. They may say that. There are people that are out there that are be like, I don't want to talk about death because I'm going to die.
Yeah. The discussion doesn't necessarily lead to the death.
Correct.
Yeah, this isn't going to kill you.
Yeah, this is not the discussion isn't going to be the thing that kills you, but it certainly can open the door to make
But the
that
fear
time
of it,
life.
the fear, if you don't talk about it, the fear of it can make your experience a lot more stressful.
There's still people, because sometimes I think I'm a little bit more, just from all the experience that I had from 1999 until now, I'm a little more open to ask people. So like, what are your final wishes? What do you want your family to know? I'm like, I had this conversation with my mother-in-law years ago, and she's like, I was one of the first persons. She's like, okay, let me show you what I want to be buried in.
Yeah.
Like she had her dress and all that, and I was just like, shouldn't you be showing this to your daughters? Like, so it was just, but I've done it so many times that, I can tell if it's going to make someone uncomfortable.
Right.
To be like, okay, like, it doesn't have to be uncomfortable, but have you told somebody what your wishes were? And then you still have people that are like, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. My husband's one of them. He doesn't, I'm like, babe, like he knows, my mother died of breast cancer. I was high risk, genetically. I have a lot of people in my family that have died. I just have an aunt recently that passed of breast cancer. Just, it's inevitable in my family, it seems like, genetically. And so he knows. I mean, I even told my students when I was in the hospital after losing everybody that I remember going through clinicals with my students, telling them one day, okay, y'all listen, if I drop dead right here on the floor, call Father Boyer, have him come in, give him my last rites. Don't be a hero. Don't do CPR. I do not want to go to the ICU. Like, I'm a DNR. One of the cardiovascular doctors was walking by and he's like, wait, what, Erin? Like, you're way too young to die. And this is when I'm like, but okay, age doesn't have anything to do with it. When it's my time to go, it's my time to go. I don't want anyone to be a hero. And I just want my students to know that. And I mean, that sometimes will make people uncomfortable hearing that, because again, we think age related. Oh my God. And I think at the time I was 49. I was 46 when my mom died. And here I was at 49, like, okay, I'm going to make peace with this now.
Yeah.
And so my husband knows, like, okay, I want to be cremated. And I'm like, where we don't even have a cemetery plot or anything. These are things I think about, like, I don't want you to have to make these decisions and all that. So I'm like, where do you want to be buried? Do you want to be buried in your family cemetery? Or if we're looking for land somewhere else, like, are we going to be in another state? Like, what are we going to, I don't know. Do you want to be cremated? I don't know. Like, I'm like, because if you don't tell me what you want, I'm going to make the decision of what I want. And I would rather do, as hard as it seems, I would rather do what he would want. Mm-hmm. I did that for my mom. When my mom said, I'm ready to go into hospice, the only thing I didn't do that my mom told me I needed to do that I refused to do is when my mom decided, okay, Erin, I'm ready to go into hospice. I made my peace. I'm ready to go. You need to call your brother and tell your brother. I'm like, oh, no. You're still alive. I am not calling my brother to tell him that. You are going to call him and you are going to make that call.
Yeah.
And so then she did. She's like, okay, she made me a list of everybody. This is everybody that we're going to call today. So for like 2 days, she made phone calls from the hospital and she talked to everybody. And those people that she wanted that were near and dear to her to come, she asked for them to come and see her and all that. So she did all of that because she died in July. And my brother's birthday was in October. So, okay, when I need you to get this for your brother for his birthday. The only thing I didn't do was go. I didn't have the forethought to go and buy a birthday card and have her sign it.
Oh, right.
But I did get the gift that she wanted for him and for my brother. So I think it allows that conversation too, especially when you are there in the end, like my friend whose friend was dying of cancer, that it allows you that opportunity to say, okay, I know these are my final days. I don't know if I have a week left or if I have a month, but today I want to make sure that my child has their Christmas gift, or, it allows you to be present in their life, even though you're not going to be there.
Well, and it allows you to leave at peace, where you know that you're at peace and your family is going to be at peace, without having all of the decisions that have to be made.
Yeah, I'm sure people die more peacefully when those T's are crossed and the dots are dotted, just it's less chaotic for them, and
Right.
the to-do list is shorter, so I'm sure they pass easier.
And they're gonna grieve. Even when you walk that walk, like with a cancer patient or a chronic COPD patient or whatever, you have that anticipatory grief, right?
Right.
Like you're walking that walk with them, knowing that this isn't going to get better, and our time is coming to an end close, and they're still going to have that grief there. So if you are intentional, you can take a lot of the extra decisions off of them, so that they can really just focus on grief and healing, walking through that grief journey. And every day is healing. I think the other thing, on the flip side of not talking about death, on the flip side of after death, everybody's afraid to approach you and like, so tell me about your dad. Tell me about your daughter's husband. Like that is so healing for people. And you just don't realize that. It's just me and my brother. My mom was an only child. My brother does not like to talk about it. Unless he brings it up, we're not allowed to talk about it. Well, my father-in-law had just died. It's been 6 months this month, January. My husband has 3 sisters. And not everybody talks about it, but he has one sister he's really close to, and they get to grieve together. And during hunting season, he got to go home and he got to talk to a lot of men, other hunters, and they got to tell stories of his dad and his grandfather and his uncle, all those men that have gone before him in his life. And I guess in French around here, they say they lavade together, where they go and have coffee and sit around. And even though it made him cry, he was like, oh my gosh, I needed that. I needed to talk about my dad. I needed to talk about my grandfather. All of those things he needs to talk about. It's very therapeutic and very healing.
A lot of people want to skip the suffering as much as they can, but there is so much like peace and growth through just going through it as opposed to avoiding it.
So if you don't go through it, it will stay with you for much longer. It will hurt much longer if you don't allow yourself to feel it and to talk about people that have passed. And
yeah.
And I would imagine those with a stronger faith have more peace through that process, believing what's after.
Right.
As opposed to, I can't imagine how scary death would be if I didn't have that security. So I'm sure that's a huge process of it too.
And I would say at the bedside, yeah, looking back on a lot of those that had a really great faith, and no matter what their faith was, those that had a really great faith.
They had confidence in.
Yeah. They had confidence in like
it's not the end.
We're just passing through. We're just pilgrims in this life on a journey passing through. This wasn't where eternity is.
It's not the end, right?
And so a lot of them did have a lot more peace with their. I did have a few of faith that had a lot of unresolved traumas in their life, whether it be with parents or siblings or spouses or whatnot. And so there was a lot of bitterness in the end of their life. And so because they hadn't resolved those yet, I'm not ready to go yet.
Right.
And it was very unpeaceful for them in their passing. So that's where a lot of books that I've read in The Art of Dying Well, it is making peace with a lot of things that have gone on in your life. Healing through the traumas, letting go, having that forgiveness type thing where you're able to, okay, when I get to this end of life, I'm good here.
Yeah. Be able to accept the process, even if it wasn't exactly the way that you would have imagined it, but you can accept where you are in the process with that.
Exactly.
Any other book recommendations? I know you've mentioned 2, The Art of Dying Well and Let's Talk About Death Over Dinner.
for me, for children, there was a book called Maybe Death is Like a Light. And it's a children's book, and it kind of goes through like maybe death is like a light bulb. It flickers and comes back. And she uses these metaphors where she kind of helps kids understand the end of life. So that was one that I was interested in ordering.
I think I've just read so many, and I always go back to his book. Let's Talk About Death Over Dinner. I always go back to that because we have to have a conversation. And then I branch into like Matthew Kelly has Life is Messy.
I've read a few of his books. I worked at Cincinnati Children's for a few years, and a lot of their work-life balance workshops were based on Matthew Kelly's books.
So he writes a lot about that. So this was a really great book, kind of accepting of how life is. And then his fourth quarter book. I don't know. I'll have to maybe when this comes out, I'll have to list
put
my
some in the
books.
show notes.
I'll put that in the show notes. Exactly. I'll have to go back and look. I've watched.
I think this conversation is probably going to spark some people thinking about this a little bit further. And besides, obviously, having you as a great resource.
Well, and I want, a friend of mine one time when I came across this several years ago, and I started wanting to have these dinners, and she's like, I would tell everybody about it. She's like, well, don't tell everybody because then everybody will want it. I'm like, no, this is what I want. I want everybody to do this because I think this would be great because it's not just a one and done dinner conversation.
Right.
It's, I mean, one of the
and your thoughts may change, throughout your life too.
Absolutely.
But at least it gets you thinking about it before you're in that high stress environment,
right,
where it's just so hard to think. You don't have clarity. It's just so hard to make decisions.
Right. I mean, one of the couples that was at our dinner party at our house, her husband is a nurse practitioner, and her husband is a funeral director, and he talked about the people that were a mess that came into his, had no clue what they were too busy arguing. They're worried about who's going to get the money, this and that. And it's, he was like, gosh, if they would have these conversations ahead of time, then it would also spark the person that is dying to make sure that all this is taken care of. I have an aunt right now who's like, oh no, my son will take care of it. I'm just like,
that's so much pressure on that person.
Right.
There's a quote in the book. It's he was quoting someone else, but she said, we're all going to die. And I'm paraphrasing this. We can either talk about it and deal with it or leave a shit show for everybody else around us. And as someone who has lived through a couple of those shit shows, getting your eggs all in the basket and getting your shit together.
Or at least around the basket.
Yeah, just gather it and organize it a little bit. It helps people grieve and go through what they need to go through without having to deal with all the business around death. You don't have to fight with your sister at the funeral home and get kicked out.
Yeah, because it will bring out, a death will bring out, or the walk to death, the end of life will bring out the best or the worst in people. And I would say that 90% of the time it brings out the worst in people.
It does.
It's only a select few times when it actually brings the family together and they cling to each other for support and all that. A lot of times it just divides everybody.
That's so sad.
That is. It's terribly sad.
Well, I think we need to have a vivid death over dinner conversation.
Yeah.
And it's such an important conversation, and hopefully this ripple effects out and we kind of change the way we all view death and dying.
Yeah, and how to approach it. I mean, it doesn't have to be a hard conversation, and I think we make it hard.
I think part of the putting it off, just like anything, that the longer you put it off, the harder it becomes, versus if you just open up the conversation, the agony of having to start the conversation goes away.
Yeah, that's the hardest part.
Yeah, the initiation of it, I think, is the biggest challenge. Once you get started, then you're either going to continue the conversation with the person or they're going to shut it down real quick, but at least you know how they feel about it. And maybe it's just breaking the ice, but you can continue to bring it up in various ways, in various conversations.
And seeing it as more of a continuum. I feel like a lot of people either see it as, I need to make all these decisions and get it down legally and write it down and do the whole, logistic process, and don't really see it as a continuum of, you can start talking about these things, start thinking about it. And then once you're comfortable with your decisions, then you can get it legally written down. And that can always change, but see, it's not so black or white.
What allows you to, if you're comfortable with asking the questions and that person is shutting you down, they don't want to talk about it, then you can say, well, would you like to hear what I would like?
Right.
You know, you're important enough in my life where I feel like I need to share these decisions with you. Do you want to hear what I have to say?
Right.
And sometimes it will put people at ease, and then sometimes it won't. I had an aunt that we just did her memorial recently, and she had the forethought to pay for her cremation, but there was nothing planned after that. So it's like, what do you do with the ashes? And she was living in Houston, but she's from Louisiana, around Alexandria area. And my uncle at her memorial was telling everybody that when my aunt moved away, it was her senior year of high school. She moved to Houston. And she said when she moved away, she told everybody in Louisiana she was never coming back. Other than to visit, she was never coming back. And my aunt was 88. And I thought, well, that's funny now, because guess where her ashes are? She's coming back. My uncle's bringing, because like where my aunt, her husband is buried in the family cemetery up around Alexandria. And so my uncle, that would just only seem fitting. You know, what do you do with her ashes?
Right.
So
ironically, my sister has had this, she has this all laid out. She is married, but she legally has it written in some of their information that when she is cremated, she wants to be put in an urn on my mantle, my fireplace mantle, so that every Friday at 5:00 we can do a toast.
I love that.
So that's legally written out, so we know exactly where she's going to be. So I told my husband, wherever we go, we have to have a mantle, because that's where Rebecca's going to sit.
I love that.
And so, I mean, you can have fun with it, but it allows that person to still have, like, again, be present, even though they're not.
Well, and like we mentioned, talking about it doesn't mean that you're accepting that you're going to die tomorrow.
Right.
Like, you can still have a lot of hope. I am a big, firm believer in how powerful the brain is in health and living. But you can have these conversations and feel at peace with it while also having a lot of hope to continue living a really healthy life.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's finding purpose in that life you have right now at this moment today. Is finding that purpose in there, that you're just not running from one task to another task to another task, and you're
not living in fear.
Right.
So we could sit here for 6 more hours and talk about this. It's an amazing conversation, but unfortunately we're almost out of time. A question that we ask all of our guests before we wrap up is, what does living vividly mean to you?
For me, it's just waking up, finding joy, and spreading love. However I can do that each and every day.